Hello and welcome to this virtually social catch-up. I'm Jimmy Gallagher and today we're going to be exploring the world of Science Capital. Welcome to the show. As ever today, we have three fantastic speakers who are each going to give their unique insight into the world of Science Capital. We're going to look at the concepts of it, how it can be deployed, and how it can inform our science communication practice. First up, we're going to go to each of our panellists in turn for an introduction. First of all, Louise, over to you.
Hi, thanks very much, Jamie. It's really nice to be here. So I'm going to do a brief sort of introduction to Science Capital. And then also, I think I'm going to top and tail it after the other speakers, also a bit of what's coming next and where we're going next with it as well. So yeah, drawing on our research with young people and how to engage them.
Thanks, Louise. Welcome to the session. Next up, we're going over to the Ogden Trust to hear from Clare. Clare, hello.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. I'm Clare Harvey from the Ogden Trust. I'm Chief Executive there. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we use Science Capital, but also some of the broader Aspires research in our thinking about strategy and evaluation and how it's all filtered in to that. I do apologise for the backlit situation.
So welcome to Clare. And next up, our third and finalist panellist, we have Carol Davenport. Carol, hello.
Hi, yes, my name's Carol Davenport. I'm the director of an outreach group called NUSTEM up in Northumbria University in Newcastle, and I'm going to be talking about how you can take a really interesting theoretical construct and make use of it in front of children and other people.
Thanks, Carol. Next, we're going to cycle back round and we're going to hear the main contributions from each of our speakers. So to start us off and work out what Science Capital really is, how the term came to be, let's go back over to Louise.
Thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully, because I'm an academic, so I have to have some slides because we can't cope otherwise. Scary place, world without slides. Okay. Oops. Is that sharing or not?
It is, yes.
Excellent. Good. Right. Just bring that across so I can see it. Right. No, for some reason I can. Okay. So, if I can get to the right one. So, Science Capital, many of you I know will be aware of it already, but just a quick introduction for those who aren't. It was developed in one of our longitudinal research projects that we've got, the Aspires project, and we've extended it in other projects, and we'll be talking about one of them in particular. Claire will talk a bit more about one of them, I think. It draws on sociological theory, and it's basically a way that we came up with just to hold together all of the science-related resources that somebody might have. So it's a bit like we talk about it as a bag or a holdall. And through various surveys and empirical work, we've worked out how there are kind of four main rough pockets in there. It encompasses what you know about science, so your scientific literacy, how you think about science, so your attitudes and dispositions, who you know, so science-related people that you might talk with, who encourage and motivate you, and what you do. So we work predominantly with young people, so what they do that's to do with science in their spare time, so all the great science engagement work that all of you do. We know from our various empirical surveys that we've done that about 5% of 11 to 15-year-olds in England have what we say high levels of Science Capital, and about 27% have low Science Capital. And through this work and tracking them over time, we know now that the more Science Capital a student has, the more likely they are both to aspire to and to continue in science post-16, and to also have what we call a science identity, to see themselves and to be seen by others as a sciencey person. And through our work, we've also worked out that we know it relates strongly to science, but particularly strongly to participation in physics, but it's also a reasonable proxy for other forms of STEM. So we know it relates strongly to engineering. It relates to maths and computing as well, but not quite as strongly, so particularly science and engineering. So the researcher, it kind of originated from our Aspires research, is a really nice longitudinal project. We're tracking a cohort of young people, their post-millennial cohort, and we've been tracking them over time, particularly from the age of 10 now up to age 20, 23, which is where we are currently. And for all of that research we've done, we've tried to summarise it into this handy graphic. This, in one sense, the key thing that this graphic is saying is there's no one single factor that affects, that predicts or determines whether a young person goes on to have a science identity and to continue in it. It is all very complex, obviously. But we would say that the thing we're trying to understand is in the middle here, the science identity and aspiration. And around that is the extent to which young people feel recognised, that they can do well and they continue with science. And all of this is threaded through by intersectional inequality. So things like gender, ethnicity and social class work their way all through this. If we look at all the factors, we can see they fall into three rough groupings. We've got capital related issues, educational factors and practices, and we've got dominant representations of science, particularly the idea of science being clever and very masculine. So the point I want to make in this figure is that science capital is an important explanatory concept, but it is also part of a wider picture of factors. It's not the only thing. Although, as you can see down here, it is important. So, you know, in our data, we can see that 80% of those who never aspired to science had low science capital, and 83% of those who continued after the age of 18 had high science capital, which we find a really useful concept, but just want to flag that it works in and through all of these other factors too. Just a couple of key principles of science capital that sometimes are sort of harder to grasp. The first is that capital isn't fixed or deterministic. So it's not that a young person has a fixed amount of science capital that never changes and that has the same value wherever they are. The key point here from our sociological lens is the value of capital is determined by what we call the field or the context. So it really matters what teachers do, what science engagement practitioners do, people in wherever it is, science clubs, science centres and all of that. The context you set up will determine the amount and the ways in which young people are able to draw on and use and get their resources, things they know and care about, translating into engagement with science and being able to continue with it, or engage with it, or feel it's for me. So capital operates through this interaction. It's not a thing that's completely separate. It matters how you feel about yourself, how you're seen by others, and the context that you're in. How friendly science is, how much science is seen to connect to you and yourself and what's important to you. Just flagging as well, I've used the terms high and low, but we use these very provisionally. They're very problematic. They imply this sort of fixed idea of science capital. But the point we want to make is no one has no science capital. The issue is how far we can translate their existing identities and experiences into forms of science, recognise them in ways that we engage with science to help them feel that meaningful connection. And the last bullet point there is one of our key messages, which was we're very much talking about changing the field, whether that's changing practice in schools, changing the ways that we do science engagement, that we experience it in out-of-school settings, changing the field and not the young person, because we're very much interested in changing the things which create the exclusion in the first place so that we can welcome and value a broader range of young people and their capital. And just a couple of pointers forward how we're using it in practice. We think it's useful for helping explain why we have these entrenched and unequal patterns in participation. We've been interested in the way it's helped shift some of the STEM education policy discourse away from just increasing interest towards engaging in different ways, changing practice to build science capital. We've integrated it into a teaching approach which has been developed in secondary, and Claire's going to mention we've got a project currently which is really nice, working in primary to develop that. And we've also been working with it in informal science learning settings through a couple of other projects, but I'll come back in a bit to explain a little bit more about those. But I shall stop there. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Louise. Now we want to look at how science capital is being put into practice. And so someone who's been using that a lot is Clare at the Ogden Trust. So Clare, let's go back over to you.
Thank you. So for those of you who haven't come across the Ogden Trust, we're specifically an organisation set up to support the teaching and learning of physics. So in a lot of ways, we describe ourselves as a science education organisation more than science communication or public engagement. We don't work directly with the young people ourselves for the most part. Our programs are targeted at schools and teachers and at universities. And part of those programs involves the opportunity for those teachers to get involved in various types of extracurricular activity, And obviously the outreach officers we support at universities are involved in the delivery of those activities. So I think the first thing I would really like to flag is that broader set of research that Louise mentioned, that longitudinal work through the Aspires programme. There's so much in addition to Science Capital to inform the thinking. So for me, the first Aspires report, which said that young people are interested in science and they think it's important, but they think it's not for them, was really actually the starting point around our strategy. Because when I started the Ogden Trust, a lot of our schools were getting involved in the big whiz-bang demo show. They were taking them off to lectures. If asked what it was for, get them excited about science. And actually that understanding that that's not what is necessarily useful to be doing, I think is really valuable. So I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the strategy, because I will assume that most of you have not read it before. So it comes down two strands really around supporting physics teaching, but then this strand that we've called supporting students to develop physics identity. And I would caveat that this is identity in the common parlance, not in the sociological lenses, which obviously brings a lot more depth to it. But what we were trying to do then with the breakdown of that is encourage the teachers to think beyond the pure fun and games and thinking about working with families, how you can bring everyone in. Careers awareness was one of the things on Louise's broader picture around it, and how that fits in. You'll notice that we have low science capital as one of the target audiences. So we're using science capital in this terminology about trying to reach out to certain groups who perhaps aren't accessing what's going on. And I think this comes back again to this idea of kind of the field versus trying to change the child. It's quite easy in our sector, I think, to fall back on ideas like hard to reach audiences rather than focusing on the idea that it might be our activities that are not accessible to the type of people we would like to reach, and really centering in on our activities and how we can make sure they suit. So the teaching approach that Louise mentioned talks a lot about eliciting the experiences of the young people and how you can value those and personalize the learning to them. And I think that applies a lot to a lot of the outreach work and science communication work to really understand your audience. And we've had 4 primary school teachers working with Louise over the last year on applying that to primary science and the younger audience as well. And they're seeing some really great impacts in their classrooms off the back of that. The other bit we come up against is, you know, still in some grant applications and people, what they're talking about trying to change the science capital. This activity, this one workshop is going to change the science capital of all the young people in it. And obviously that's problematic from a lens perspective about changing the field rather than changing the science. But also from an ethical perspective, you know, there's a lot of aspects that make it up that you shouldn't be changing about the young people and the family. But so it's thinking about how that fits. And so what we've been developing with the help of Charlotte Thorley is a toolkit for evaluation that picks up some very specific indicators that are linked to science capital, and looking at how we can measure perhaps some incremental shifts off that. It is currently in design, and I'm hoping that will be published by the end of July, but we will be publishing that for everyone. So if you're interested in taking a look at that and seeing how that might affect how you think about evaluating and measuring the changes from your activities, that might be useful. I'm going to stop there because 4 minutes zoosh has passed.
Thanks, Claire. Next, we're going to Carol, and Carol's going to tell us a little bit about how she's been using the concepts of Science Capital to change and embed practice. Carol, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen because, as Louise says, academics need a screen to share. So hopefully you can now see my screen. So, excellent. So, NUSTEM, we're based at Northumbria University. We're a faculty outreach group, and we started 6 years ago when some of the ideas about science capital, some of the first papers from Aspires were making their way into the literature. And we found it really, really useful, and it really resonated with what we wanted to do. And then we started to thinking, okay, what do we do differently to make things, to change things? So we're working with 34 primary schools, and our focus is on girls and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And we work with families and teachers as well as children, which is a little bit unusual for universities. And what we found as we started out is that measuring changes in science capital is very hard, particularly if you're working with young children who are 6, 7, 8 years old, because the demographic data that often is quite helpful, little children have no idea. We did try and ask them how many shelves of books or books they have in their house, because that's quite a good proxy for status, and they hadn't got a clue. So that was quite tricky. So where we've gone is we focus on supporting aspects of science capital, because we also realize that there is an ethical issue of trying to change people, trying to change parents and children. So we support aspects of science capital. And I just pulled out 3 key points that I think that we found have come out of science capital for us. So the first is about broadening understanding of careers. How can we show young people, children, families and teachers how careers are actually, there's a lot more to them than they realize. So we develop tools for teachers to use that help teachers know about careers. So this is a screenshot of our primary careers tool, which is linked by national curriculum topic in maths and science, so that teachers can find a career that's linked to a thing. And as a public engagement professional, if you're trying to think, okay, I'm doing a workshop or I'm doing a show on forces and magnets, what careers could I use? This tool will show that for you. We also put all of our workshops in that careers context. So our floating and sinking workshop for year 1 is actually called the Naval Architect, because that helps the children just get a feel that actually there is something about this science that I'm learning that might have an impact more broadly. The second thing I would say is highlight the shared attributes between your audience and STEM people. So rather than just talking about what a job is about, what you do, talk about what you're like if you're doing that job. And we have a range of activities. This is the STEM Person of the Week, where we showcase different people. But what I would say is don't focus on intelligence and cleverness. That is a real barrier for young people. And we do know that there is a certain amount of achievement required to work in some STEM jobs, but let's not put kids off early with that. And then the third one would be about including families. So it's so easy, particularly university outreach, STEM engagement, just to work with those young people. But if we're not working with the ecosystem around them, then things will not improve in many ways. So we work to normalize those intergenerational science conversations. We show science, we show STEM as a way of asking questions and solving problems, not just stuff that you have to know, which is really important if you stop doing GCSE at 16, because it is just a bunch of stuff to know. I've put that, we have got our approach. If anybody is interested in it, I'll put it in the chat. But that's what I wanted to say, that Science Capital has been really, really helpful for us, and it's allowed us to think more nuancedly, I don't think it's a word, but with more nuance about how we approach children, families and teachers with our work. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks to all our speakers. That wraps the session up for today and our last virtually social of the season. Hopefully I'll see you again back online. I hope you've enjoyed these. I've had a fantastic time making them. Goodbye.